Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight my guest is the President of the United States, Barack Obama. Mr. President, welcome to my show.
Pleasure to be here.
After this devastating election debacle, how do you feel right now, Mr. President?
Frankly, I could not care less. But to answer your question, I don't feel too good right now, nevertheless.
I hear you have suffered a serious depression and have been in psychotherapeutic treatment and even in a meditation retreat. Why don't you tell us a little more about that?
Yes, of course. I was so frustrated about the recession that will inevitably turn into a depression very soon. And none of the things I was trying seemed to work.
You mean the TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, the quantitative easing of the Fed and the bailout of the banks?
Yes.
When we talked before the show, you said that it is just a matter of time that our financial and economic system as we know it will break down?
I'm afraid that this will be the case, yes.
Wow. I am sure you gave this some serious thought before you say something like that on live television?
Yes, I did, Larry. But I'm not talking about the end of the world. During my time out, I had some good ideas how we can rebuild our social life and our social structure.
Wait a minute. You are talking about a necessary rebuilding of our society. What exactly are you expecting? And what will be the course for all of this?
Sooner or later, probably sooner, the people will lose confidence in the governments all over the world. We will never be able to pay back our debts. The interest rates will skyrocket. We will have to print our way out of the misery, and that will cause riots that the world has never seen before. The necessary monetary reform will wipe out the middle class. And I'm sure they won't like that, and they will rebel.
And there is nothing that can be done?
I was also reluctant to admit that. But Larry, we are far beyond the point of return. It all began with the central banking system. When the government starts to interfere with the interest rates, it sends wrong signals to the people. It's so tempting for us politicians to tell the Fed to lower the interest rates and to print money, because that will give the economy a short-term boost. But then the people will spend more than they should, and in the long run the consequences are fatal.
You sound like a free marketeer and not like a Democrat.
I know, Larry. Unfortunately, I grew up in a family of academics. In state universities you learn that the state is a necessity and that without a state modern life would not be possible. What else should they tell you? If one happens to recognize that all state interference is violent by nature, one has to quit the job as a state employee, or otherwise you will be a hypocrite.
Mr. President, doesn't that mean you would have to resign as well?
I will.
What?
Yes, you heard right. I will hand in my resignation as soon as I have made all arrangements necessary so that the following administration cannot cause too much damage.
I am flabbergasted. But let me return to what you said before. You mentioned you had some ideas about our society in the future?
Yes, Larry, it all begins with a new ethic position. Up till now we all thought good ends will justify many means. That is a sure way to a dead end. If we all instead remind ourselves of the most basic rule, everything will turn out all right, eventually.
And that basic rule is what?
Every man has freedom to do all that he wants, provided that he doesn't violate the equal freedom of any other.
Is that not the same as the non-aggression principle?
Yes. The non-aggression principle states that aggression is not legitimate.
But how do you define aggression?
It's the initiation of force against persons or property.
And I cannot even defend myself?
Yes, you can. That is the difference to the simple-hearted pacifism of the peace movement. The non-aggression principle does not exclude defense.
So if I understand it correct, politics is also not legitimate?
You are right. And this is the reason why I will quit. I cannot justify the concept of taxes anymore, since they are a demand and not a request. Strictly speaking, it is a form of robbery.
Wow. Taxes as a form of robbery? Is this new interpretation the reason why you became depressive?
No, Larry. I became depressive because none of my actions seemed to work. Unfortunately, I only became aware of the nonviolent philosophy in therapy.
Into the clutches of which psycho-charlatan did you fall there?
His name is Marshall Rosenberg, and he is not a charlatan. I think his ideas are the key to peace and prosperity in the world. If you follow his concept of nonviolence, you abstain from demands and replace them by requests.
What's the difference?
You can say no to a request.
I understand. And this attitude is incompatible with politics.
Right.
Now don't you feel depressed because you lived the life of a politician who is responsible for the legislation which purely consists of demands?
No. Marshall taught me that everything a person does is done to satisfy universal needs.
So behind your actions there were universal needs as well. Universal love, I suppose.
I understand your sarcasm. But believe me or not, I was convinced to contribute something to the well-being of the people. I didn't know better at the time. This attitude helps me a lot. I have no hostile feelings against anyone. I have even empathy for all my fellow politicians. They all want to satisfy universal needs.
Does that mean a murderer is also driven by universal needs? And what are they?
He may be concerned about his safety, or he had a need for connection.
With all due respect, are you out of your mind?
I know this concept is hard to grasp. For example, if the person committed a robbery homicide, he just wanted to provide food for his family.
And you are saying this behavior is all right?
Not at all. I just say that it doesn't make sense to condemn a murderer. His actions were a tragic expression of an unmet need. We should help him to meet his needs in a way so that the needs of everybody else are considered. And it might be necessary to lock him up for a while. In the nonviolent philosophy, we call this a protective use of force.
Now you sound like a hippie libertarian. Explain to me how you differ from the normal libertarians like Ron Paul.
Ron Paul still wants to become president. Apparently he still believes in government and politics. I'm convinced that he has the best intentions. But I have tried this approach and I know that it is neither practical nor ethical.
Can you explain our listeners the practical ramifications of your ideal world? For example, who will build the roads? Who will run the schools? Who will defend our country? Who will feed the hungry? And who will help the handicapped?
You can trust me, Larry. Of course I have thought about all these questions. Answering them all in a satisfying way would take more than time permits right here. But if our listeners really want to abstain from violence, there is lots of literature about it. You could read Murray Rothbard, Hans Hermann Hoppe, or you could watch the free videos of Stefan Molyneux. Mises.org is also a good place to start in the World Wide Web.
I have read all the books you recommended as a preparation for this show, but I must say they have a different undertone compared to your argumentation.
I know. The libertarian or anarchist world has not discovered Marshall Rosenberg yet, and vice versa. I see it as my life task to bring these worlds together, cause the libertarians will never convince the majority, or not even a critical mass, as long as they encounter the others with criticism and accusations. Criticism does not work. Empathy does. On the other hand, I'm pretty sure that the Rosenberg followers would probably only try my socialistic approach again. They might call it sociocracy. But nonviolence combined with any form of democracy is self-contradicting. If in the end, the minority has to do what the majority wants, we are talking about coercion. And coercion is irreconcilable with the philosophy of nonviolence.
So you could call this a genuinely new third way.
If you want to label it that way.
Thanks so far, Mr. President. If you think that this is an interesting concept, join us next week when we discuss more implications of the President's encounter of this mysterious Marshall Rosenberg.